Yeah, and did that artwork come before the Sharks logo? I know that's like a iconic logo. It's one of the best sports logos of all time, and I know in the '90s, like everybody was. I mean, there was kids in Cleveland, Ohio, wearing Sharks stuff. It's just one of those teams. So, did that come as a result of like working with Fleer?
No, actually, again, like I said, there are a lot of people, people who know that I do sports stuff don't know I do video game stuff, and people who know I do sports paintings didn't know I did logos and all that kind of stuff. So, no, the Sharks logo came about. I was out here in the Bay Area. There was a group that was going to move because they used to be, the Sharks at one time were the Minnesota North Stars, right? And so they moved them out here. They split the Minnesota North Stars in two. Half the guys went to what was going to become, Barry hockey, which turned into the Sharks, and the other half ended up in Dallas, which is, that's why Dallas is still the Stars. They kind of kept the North Star part of it anyway. But now if somebody asked me to speak at a conference, on sports marketing, and I happened to have a bunch of my other paintings, and I was talking about, different approaches to sports marketing. And again, just like we talked about what sports art was, kind of traditionally, all the stuff that I do, none of it was traditional. We were kind of, we were doing very innovative things because that's, kind of what I believed in. So the Sharks logo, the guys approached me afterwards, said, "Have you ever done any logos?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, would you consider doing this?" And I said, "Yeah." And they were going to have a contest. And I said, "Well, I really, I'm not interested in being a contest. I'm interested, if you want to pay me to do it, I'll do it, but I'm not going to just, do a contest." So long story short, they did the contest, right? But what they didn't tell people when they were doing the contest is they were already paying me to design the logo and stuff. And at the time, what was interesting about that whole process was at the time, NHL properties didn't exist. So for those of you who are familiar with how sports work, there's NFL properties, NBA properties, Major League Baseball properties, and they control all the licensing. So if you're using logos and uniforms and all that kind of stuff, there's a fee that has to be paid, and all the owners split the revenue from licensing. And then, there's a separate organization, the Players Association. So if you're doing something that involves players and teams and logos and all that kind of stuff, that's why on all your cards, you're going to see, officially licensed by the leagues and also the Players Association. But when we first started doing when we did the Shark stuff, I guess it was 35 years ago, there was no NHL properties. So that meant when the Sharks logo came out, nobody could have predicted the success. You mentioned they were buying it in Cleveland. Well, what happened is they were buying it all over the world. It became the number 2 selling logo worldwide only behind the Chicago Bulls. The power of Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Back then. But they made so much money. And again, like I said, that meant that the Sharks got all that money. It wasn't split. And so not soon after, all of a sudden, NHL properties exist. Because they, again, we were doing something that was very different. I was creating stuff that to sell merchandise, to sell apparel. We introduced some new colors. It was very non-traditional as far as hockey goes. The people at the NHL were in an uproar, right? Here, somebody's created a logo and a mark that is taking the main tool of their trade, the hockey stick, and having it bitten in half, right? So
and
it was
and bold colors too, like with the turquoise and stuff.
But people have to realize back then, again, hockey still, even today, they struggle television wise, but hockey made their money on putting butts in the seats. They also made their money in terms of any kind of licensing and merchandising was made on what was sold in the local market. It's not what it is today. And so, what I was looking at, even when we started designing, think about it, how many teams in the States, what was the furthest team west? Well, you had the Kings in LA, but after that, I don't know, was it Chicago? I mean, what was the furthest team? There were no hockey teams, northwest of the Mississippi or whatever. So what I was looking at is from a design perspective. I know both of you guys dabble in that area. Is who's my audience? What are they going to respond to? We know if they're going to be buying stuff in the local market, I have to be designing stuff for the local market. So my focus was I needed something. And again, how many people in California were playing hockey, right? So we had to create something. I could, if I'd done something with Sharp, but there's no hockey stick, they're not going to know what it is. They don't even know the sport. The other side of it, I was looking, okay, it's going to have to be a younger demographic, because, older people, especially in Northern California, yeah, we have a lot of transplants, but, people who've been here for a long time, they didn't grow up with hockey. So I knew that, again, the way hockey was played, it's an exciting sport, but it's going to be, it's going to have a younger appeal. So I started focusing more on the surf and skateboard culture, in California. I started focusing on those colors. I started focusing on the kind of thing, again, that would appeal to a younger audience and an audience that was going to be new to a sport. So one thing led to another. So most people are familiar with what the logo looks like. We've since updated it from the original one. So I did both the original one, and then we updated it. I think it was maybe 10 or 12 years later to what it is now.
Oh, nice.
But what it did do was it changed how the NHL thought about marketing its sport. And it changed how people in sports, if they were savvy enough, thought about how they're going to design their logos and how much money and just overall, I guess the best word is how do you get eyeballs on your team? So the Sharks were selling merchandise all over the world months before the team even played a game. And so what it did is it made people rethink just strategically. I designed not necessarily to represent an area or a team or things like that, but I was just trying to design something, and again, couldn't have predicted the success, but trying to design something that would generate revenue. Because think about it, their ability to sign players and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't television money, right? It was putting butts in the seats, and then again, each team owned their own stuff. So the more money they could make, the better they could say and sign in terms of their roster. And if you go back and look at the Sharks' early years, they needed help.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. Like as I think about like logos or even uniform design today, you see a lot of the fans in the stands wearing the old jerseys or like hats with like the throwback logos, and I feel like a lot of teams today, we're here to talk about sports cards, but like I love all this stuff too, and it's like this is awesome as part of your background. So I know Joe's loving it too, being a graphic designer. So, but like a lot of the jerseys and uniforms are just becoming very generic now. Like if you look at baseball, especially, I feel it's just like a gray jersey with a simple font of their city, and they're kind of like losing. How many navy and gray uniforms can you have in Major League Baseball? And so some of those iconic logos and designs just aren't there anymore. I feel, I don't know, they're getting distorted in a weird way.
Well, again, what you have to realize, if you start a team today, the Sharks logo would not exist if by today's standards. In other words, back then the the people who were starting the team contacted me. I was working with them, and they were giving me a lot of freedom and flexibility to create something unique for them. Nowadays, everything is handled by the leagues. So teams can pick their names and they can try to go out and find people, but ultimately the leagues, have final say. The leagues have design departments and they try to influence it. If you look at uniforms, like all the NBA uniforms, they don't get the design. Nike, right? Nike designs them all. And the same thing, you got Fanatics coming in, you got all this stuff. So everything now is so corporate, it's so controlled that's part of what you're seeing is everything is, everything. It's like if all the designs were done by one designer, where's the innovation? Where's the stuff that's going to look different? How are people going to stand out? It all looks the same because it's all being designed, okayed and designed from, one central point of view. So, when the Sharks first came out, if it had gone to the league, there's no way they would have ever allowed it. They didn't like it. They thought that the team was crazy for doing it. The colors are bad. They hated it. So again, when it comes to what you're seeing, today, when I look at uniforms and I look at team, logo designs and all that kind of stuff, um, there that kind of innovation, I'm just not seeing it. And there's a definite reason why. The other thing, again, even on the shark stuff, a lot of times, teams will, focus test and all kinds of stuff like that. And so from a designer standpoint, you guys can probably relate to this. And that is if you take a design and you put it in front of focus groups, and then people come back to you and say, okay, here's what we found out in the focus group. What happens is, you end up moving towards this, you know, weird space where it's like, it doesn't appeal to anybody, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, you're trying to appeal to too many people instead of, just creating something that, your gut tells you is right. Anytime you're working on art, the way I view art or anything I'm doing creatively is how do you create an emotional connection between you and the people who are going to be looking at your project. So if you think about it, the Sharks logo was designed to, the fact that it's diving, at an angle through a triangle, create a sense of motion. The idea of biting the hockey stick. The logo tells a story. And you can't say that about most logos. They
yeah,
don't they don't tell you anything. There's nothing, And now we're also getting into these esoteric names, right?